This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. On this week's episode, we talk epilogues. If you missed last week's episode on prologues, head back and check it out. And while you're there, please go to iTunes, leave us a rating and review, help our discoverability. And while you're at it, pose a craft question in that review. We will be going through the reviews, pulling questions, and doing an upcoming episode on Ask Us Anything, answering your writing questions. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy the show. An epilogue is like a prologue, something that occurs outside the main frame of your story. So you end your story, everything is resolved, there are no loose ends, and then you say 5 years later. Or in Saving Annabelle's case, I go back to that other point of view, right? And give sort of a postscript to the entire story in this different point of view. So it's something that is not just tightly held by the main framework of your storyline. So you need that separate container for it. The Harry Potter series, 7 books, and then you have the epilogue with the kids, all grown up.
I'm going to say nothing.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, we've talked about that before.
Well, yeah, but I think it bears repeating. Do not ruin what may have been like the thinker part of your book with an epilogue. And I think like if you have an ending that has any sort of ambiguity and then you come in and smash it with an epilogue, it can really hurt the reader, because I like having those endings where I have at least something to think about, even if you've tied up all the main stuff, right? Like there's just something that is still there, like happily ever after, but you don't know what the happily ever after looks like. It's kind of fun as the reader to have that sitting there for you to think about. It's not so fun for me to have the 5 years later with the neat little bow and all my thoughts are now done, right? You can't think about it. You can't ruminate on it. It's just done. And so I think if you're going to use an epilogue, like great, do it, but don't smash the one thing that you kind of left open to begin with. Like you don't need to use an epilogue just to tie that last little bow, if that makes sense.
It does, but I'm going to defend Rowling's epilogue here.
Oh, it's fine with Rowling's epilogue. I kind of get why she did it, right? But I'm like, just in general, I hate it when epilogues kind of spoil the end of the story. Like,
right.
It just, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she maybe could have written a different epilogue in some regards that would have been more satisfying to Catherine. But the thing that the epilogue does for that story is it shows us Harry's character arc fulfilled, because at the end of the 7-book plot arc, he has defeated Voldemort, but the main theme for his character arc is that he's an orphan. He's seeking family. He's especially seeking a father figure throughout all of these books. And, everyone who might be a father to him dies or, gets sent into some kind of magical black hole. So Harry, at the end of the battle at Hogwarts, can't complete his character arc. But in that epilogue, we see that Harry is a man, he's a husband, he's a father, he has family, he has community, all those things that Voldemort took from him when he was in the crib are now restored. So that's the fruition of his character arc, So for that purpose, I think we need that epilogue to not leave such a major part of that entire series hanging.
To me, if they're heavy-handed, and we can argue whether the Harry Potter one was or not, it's a little bit like going to a restaurant, having had a perfect, 3-course meal, and then finishing up and having that lovely lingering taste, and then the waiter coming and sitting down and saying, okay, so let's talk about your meal and how you felt about the starter and the entree and the dessert. And it's sort of, as Catherine said, it's sort of it doesn't leave you anything to think about. There's something about I mean, most of us, I think, would agree that we've read something that has left a lasting impact.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that is because there's unfinished business inside of us. And what you risk with an epilogue is forcing that unfinished business, or giving it granularity when it doesn't need it. And I think that's what I felt robbed of with Harry Potter, is that, I can see that that's the arc. Kids reading it wouldn't give two hoots about Harry being grown up. They just wanted Harry to kill the bad guy. So maybe there's another way of doing it. And also from a commercial point of view, you can understand, well, she'd had enough. She just needed to kill the fact that there was ever going to be anything else. And maybe that works for adults. And then there are people like myself and I don't know, possibly Catherine, I don't know how you experienced it. I just felt it was too syrupy. It was too Hollywood and too convenient. So it spoiled it, actually. So I think that's, again, similar. I mean, prologue, you could argue, is more impactful on how the story rolls out, and you've got to be more careful. But equally with an epilogue, you're now dealing with the leftover feelings, the satisfaction at the end of a fabulous meal. And what is it that you want to do with that? Do you want to try and tell people what they should have experienced? Clearly, there's a market for it. There are romance writers, for example, whose newsletters grow on the sheer fact that they give away a free epilogue to the story, because some romance readers love to know how the happily ever after played out. It wouldn't bother me at all. I just want to know how it resolves.
Right. And I have had readers come back to me and say, you didn't tell me what happened to this character. And I'm like, because isn't it obvious? I mean, can't you just imagine what happens to that character? But I think this is a really important piece of the conversation, because I agree with you that Rowling's epilogue was a bit too tidy, a bit too syrupy. And, on the other hand, would you want to see that Harry and Ginny are bickering? I mean, would you want to see that Hogwarts had to close its doors after 12 centuries of, right? Like where could she put the ambiguity without upsetting everybody? But you can also have now I'm talking the movie, I haven't read the book, but Silence of the Lambs, they get the bad guy they were calling Buffalo Bill. He's put away, the governor's daughter is out of the pit. But then there's that nice little epilogue where Clarice is back at Quetico and the phone rings and she picks it up, and it's Hannibal, and he's on a beach and he's talking about having some friends for dinner, right? So you can go with the other type of end note that does leave something open-ended. And it doesn't have to be a series hook, right? Yeah.
So to use my my restaurant analogy again, that would be then the chef coming out and saying, I'm really happy you enjoyed your meal. I prepared a special finishing dish for you all before you leave. Here you are. And, and you get this beautiful little extra dessert or like a cheese platter or something. So it's, the Hannibal thing is something that adds to the richness of the fact that we had a supporting character who was actually a villain, and it just stirs even more of that. So that's clever. Whereas the Harry Potter thing is just okay, we need to show something that's moved on,
right? And I think we don't have to use the Harry Potter thing, but like an idea that you could use for leaving it open without with the Harry Potter thing is easy. It's accessible because we know the story, right? If she had backed it up 10 years and Ginny bringing home the baby and they're walking into, they're living in Godric's Hollow and there's still ruins and there's still stuff being rebuilt, but people are moving on, but there's obviously still destruction that needs to be fixed, right? Then you get the sense of we're building a new future.
What they went through,
rather than ta-da, we're all happy and going back to Hogwarts, right? So you would still get that same sense of like, yes, done. Like, here's his family. He's got his son. He's going to be a great dad. But we don't have the full like magical moment of the station being perfect and Hogwarts Express being back and all of that, which I think is where we get that lingering sense of, that was a little too much. That didn't taste right at the end.
I mean, look at the end of the original Star Wars trilogy. Perfectly sealed up hero's journey. They get awarded their medals and cheered as they walk up the red carpet and stand on the stage there. And it's a thrilling moment. The first time you see it, it's spine tingling, and seals everything off quite nicely. We get that. We see Luke's arc very strongly and the supporting characters' arcs as well. And it's all done. There was no need for an epilogue showing, Luke back on the planet and, I don't know, praying over his aunt and uncle's graves or something. We didn't need any of that.
Well, so what you're saying is some stories need an epilogue and some stories don't, right? And the art is knowing when you need one and when you don't. And, I agree, Catherine. I think it would be much more satisfying if Rowling had shifted that epilogue way back in time. And we still could have seen that Malfoy was shamed, felt bad, and and that Harry had a family and was, had fruition to his character arc without such a tidy bow on everything. Because I think the fun as a reader in imagining those characters forward is you get to continue to spin their yarn. And when I got to Rowling's epilogue, I didn't really like that Hermione worked in the ministry or something. It just felt like they had all kind of buttoned up into suits and, ordinary life after having this 7-volume extraordinary adventure. Right. And, I like your idea of putting them back in the rebuilding phase, because then there's still work to be done and there's community to build, and it might be a different type of extraordinary, but still extraordinary. And the reader is denied that when the bow is too tidy.
Yeah, and also think about it, there might be something even deeper behind it that's not just about how heavy-handed I might have thought it was. And I love the books, so it's not necessarily criticism of the writing style or anything. It's just one of those things. Oh, okay, that was an unusual choice.
Summer is in full swing here at StoryWorks. In fact, if you can hear birds chirping in the background, it's because I've moved my office to the deck. And the StoryWorks reading series is coming back in September with new episodes. This is a reading period right now, and we are still open for submissions, so please get your stories and essays in. storyworkspodcast.com/submit so that we have time to give you full consideration and hopefully schedule your reading and interview on the StoryWorks Reading Series podcast, a podcast for readers, writers, and readers curious about writers. We give voice to your story and you.
I wonder if it's because in young adult, there's usually a central theme where they're young adults, they're becoming fully grown. It's some form of coming of age. There's some form of identity striking that says I am more than just the son or the daughter of somebody. And of course, for Harry, he didn't have parents alive, so there was an even deeper wound to that. And so for many, it's a journey, it's a quest to find themselves. Who am I in the world that's not a part of anything else? And that's usually a big theme of young adult, even in young adult romance. And so by then transporting yourself to, bing, here I am as an adult. But that's not what I wanted to read about. What I wanted to read about was the journey of becoming an adult, and the adults in the whole story are insignificant, really. in the sense that they play their parts both as protagonists and antagonists, of course, and which is again normal for young adult. But really, we're glued to Harry. We want to know what Harry does, and then all of a sudden he becomes part of the very thing that he was having difficulties with. And so maybe, deep down unconsciously, part of my jarring of it is the fact that it's a story about young people becoming adults and their struggle with that, but I don't want to read about them as adults.
Yeah. Not if they're just stuck in,
Hi, my name's Harry Potter. I work in a bank. Yep.
Right.
Very exciting.
Well, what do you like to do on the weekends, Harry? I crack open a beer and watch Quidditch on the TV.
Right. Yeah, totally. Well, and I think I want to jump onto the romance epilogues here for a second, because Robert mentioned them. And I think you have the same thing happens with romance epilogues, which is that you very rarely get 15 years in the future and they're married with their children. It's usually like if it ends with an engagement, you get a scene with the wedding. If it ends with the wedding, you get a scene with the honeymoon or just after the honeymoon, because you still don't want, as a reader, the whole this is their married life. Or in other cases, you get the 90-year-old people on the porch and they're still in love. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And that's like the extreme opposite, right? So you either get right after, or you get, they've done it. This was the dream and they did it. And it was, 50 years of marriage and there they are still. And so you get that happy feeling still, and you don't relive all that conflict or whatever that happened in their long married life. That's not the point, right? It's that happy ever after feeling still sits there. So, it's continuing the expectation the story already had through the epilogue, I think, is what we're kind of dancing around.
Yeah, I think that can depend on the genre. Like with the romance, that's clearly a genre expectation, but it doesn't have to be about where your protagonist is X years down the road. For Saving Annabelle, I've switched into an omniscient narrative for the epilogue. And that narrator is telling us things that have nothing to do with the protagonist, but it's about the setting and the supporting characters and the changes that come in that community. But our protagonist has already moved on, right? And it matches the prologue. They are a set of bookends, these two capsules and the point of view I use in them. So I just want to say that epilogues don't always need to be this glimpse of the hero in the future type of thing. But they do show us a piece of evolution that we wouldn't get to see without the epilogue. Like, how is this character, this world, this situation different now?
So is it, in that case then, is that an extra delicacy for the reader? And could your book, for example, have that epilogue stripped and it would still be fine?
In the case of Saving Annabelle, heck no. But
well, no, I mean, that's what we're kind of saying here with prologues and epilogues is that ideally they're part of the structure that makes your novel, right? So if it didn't end with that epilogue, then there'd be something missing. Whether that's, because you didn't mirror the prologue and all of a sudden, now there's like this feeling of unfinished or, you haven't quite tailed off that last little thing. Like in the case of Harry Potter, we need to see him as a dad, right?
Right.
But it's not crucial to that moment in time. It's part of a different timeline. So you have to show it separate, right? Does that? So yes. I would say you don't want to have an epilogue that can be stripped off.
Right. It needs to have some essential meaning to your story and to your reader, right? But then it's in a separate container because it is necessary for it to be separate. Yeah. If we follow the shipwreck story thread, I'm thinking, okay, so what would the epilogue be? Well, maybe the research vessel is wrecked, and maybe our protagonist, maybe like the sailors who were shipwrecked in the 19th century are haunting that wreck or that coastline or something. And so maybe there's a paranormal element to the recovery expedition. And maybe the epilogue is that, most everyone got away, was saved. The helicopter came in, our hero is fine, but somebody paid the price. Somebody on that research vessel wound up in Davy Jones's locker. And so maybe the epilogue is that person haunting or something, that kind of like Hannibal Lecter making that phone call. We don't necessarily need a sequel, but it just plants the seed in the reader's mind of like, oh, this could be continued. This story could be continued. There's, a bigger picture here. And if you want to play it out and spin your own yarn with that, you can.
Mm-hmm. So it's a tricky thing, isn't it? Because the story has to conclude, the main premise has to conclude before the epilogue. But the epilogue has to be designed to be deliberately essential to making the story better, as opposed to just something you tacked on at the end because you wanted to explain stuff.
Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well said.
Okay.
Goodness.
It's interesting, isn't it? How you can get so much out of thinking about how you're going to execute your story, because they're only a device. And so all it is a way of labeling something and then thinking about it. But I mean, why don't we have a MIDI log? Something in the middle.
Interlude?
Yeah, that's
yes.
Right. Here's where you can put the book down and completely forget about the story. A cup of tea moment.
That's right.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. Let's not have those.
No.
All right. That feels like we just ended an episode.
Yeah. However, there is one thing I'd like to add at the end to explain everything that we just said. Yeah.
Do you have a craft question you would like discussed at the Storyworks Roundtable? Then we have an offer for you. Head over to iTunes specifically, and help us with our search rankings and discoverability by leaving a review. Within that review, pose your question. We will be going through these reviews, pulling out those questions, and in an upcoming episode, we're going to answer them all. We will have a Ask Us Anything Storyworks Roundtable episode in the not too distant future. So head over to iTunes, leave us a review, and pose your question. We can't wait to discuss your most pressing craft concerns. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.